Welcome to the video. In this video I'd like to talk a little bit about how open source development works. I've had a lot of requests recently to test and try out some of the forks or copies of CleanFlight, and one of the reasons that we're not doing that is because these forks are created for a very specific reason, and I want to talk about what that is and how it all works, so that if you're looking at using some software, there's a little bit more context and you can kind of make a decision with a little bit more information. So what I'm going to do in this video is go through a number of slides and talk through a classic scenario of what's actually going on with open source software. And hopefully after watching this, you'll understand why we're not doing things with forks of CleanFlight like Betaflight and some of the others that are around at the moment. So first of all, let's start at the very beginning. Let's imagine that we have a developer who has a great idea for a project for the hobby, and he or she starts working on it, and then they make it public and put it into the community. So here we have version 1.0 of a software product that a developer's come up with on their own, and he or she has spent a lot of time creating this, and it's now in the public domain. It's available for people to use, and it's part of the open source community. Now what that means is that developers who find this stuff interesting can come and join along with this original developer and start working as a team to get the product better. And over time what happens is the product goes through multiple revisions, it's released out, things are tested, bugs are found, people use it and come and request additional features and extra bits that it can do, and additional developers join the original developer, and they continue to develop the product and take the feedback from the people who are using the software and the forums and places like GitHub to kind of shape the product. Now it's important to mention here that all the developers that are working on an open source project are not getting paid. They're giving their time freely to something that they're interested in doing. So what tends to happen is those projects that are the most interesting and get the most support tend to be the ones that get used the most and are being the most innovative. So now we have version 1.0 of this blue project that's running in the middle. Then what happens is around version 1.6 of this original blue project, one of the developers has a really good idea. So what he does or she does is create something called a fork. Now a fork is just a copy of the original software with all the source files and everything else, and this is exactly how open source works. Once something's in the open source community, anybody can come along and take a copy of it or take a fork of it to work on their own version. So in this case we have our little blue sunglass wearing developer, and he's taken this fork away and he's going to work on something that he's really interested in. Now what happens over time is that other developers might join in with the blue project that continues to run, and the orange project that's a fork of the blue project continues to run as well. But what's happening in version 1.7, 1.8 and 1.9 of the original blue project, all those changes, enhancements, fixes, cleanup that's been done with that project in that software is not making it across into the orange project. But that developer, the guy in the dark glasses, is absolutely working on the stuff that he's interested in. It might be code cleanup, it might be additional GPS functionality, it might be adding support for race timing. It's whatever he or she is interested in, and eventually what happens is they get to the end. So here the orange project got to version 1.6, and at that point the code was good enough to then be rolled back into the next version of the original project. And that now is being released as version 2.0, and that developer that went off to do his own thing is now back. So we have a team of developers that are now working together, and again you can start to see that more and more people are coming onto this blue project as it gets better and better. Next thing that happens then is one of the developers takes off because he's got a great idea for something that he or she wants to do. So off they go to work on that individual piece, and other developers join the main group and continue to develop the main code. So at this point, if you actually looked online, you might find the original blue project, you might find the files for the orange project, version 1.6 and 1.5, and you also might find the green project version 1.0, or the green project might be called version 2.0. They might have continued with the number convention of the original project when they created the fork. Now, as we go forward, then what happens is that developer continues to work on the green fork of the code with their own particular thing that they're really interested in. So this might be autonomous fly, it might be an improvement to the graphical user interface, whatever it is they're working on, and the rest of the team then continue with the main code. So now if we are looking for software for an RC device, we have version 1.2 of the green code, we have version 2.2 with the original blue code, and we also have version 1.6 is still hanging around and people are still using it. And then what happens over time is version 1.3 of the new green code is the bit where the developer gets it all right, they're happy with it, and then that code is rolled back into the main project again. And that main project, the blue project, then continues on, and they continue to develop and continue to develop. And eventually we have another fork that happens. So another developer, a brand new one, comes along and actually says, I've got a really good idea. I'd like to do something slightly different with this project. So they again create another fork and start to work on that fork themselves. However, this time, what happens as time goes on is, although the main team continue to work on the blue project, is that some of the developers jump ship because they like the way that the new purple project is running. Some of the stuff that's happening over there is more interesting and more exciting. And remember, all the developers that are working here are not getting paid, so they want to spend their time on stuff they're interested in doing. So over time, what happens is the majority of the team that was originally working on the blue project have now moved across onto the purple project, and that's picking up speed. And unfortunately, it's got now so that there just isn't enough time or resources with the developers that are left working on the blue project, so the blue project stops. And in that instance then, other developers start to come to the purple project, and the purple project is the one that's still hanging around. Now the challenge, of course, is we actually have 4 flavors of the same software. We have the main blue piece, which is the kind of the father of all of them. We have the orange and the green projects that were started, but they were there to test and develop a specific bit of code or achieve a specific objective with the blue code. It was a chance for them to go and create a sandbox that they could play with that in before those changes and improvements were rolled back into the main code. And here we have a version where now the original one has kind of run out of steam, but the fork that was created, that was the purple version, has now got all the developers, and that's the one that's going to continue. There's another thing that happens as well. So if we imagine that some of the developers decide that actually, you know what, version 3.3 was almost there, and although the original blue fork has kind of died a death, what they'll do is they'll take that code which is there freely available to anybody, and then they'll pick it up and start to develop it in their own way. So you might end up with yet another project. So let's just try and put some names on these kind of ideas. We've got a rough idea of how this kind of stuff works. You can tell it's kind of organized chaos, but the way this is working is the projects that are the most interesting attract the most developers, attract the most users, get the most feedback, and continue to grow. And only those projects that continue to innovate and be interesting to developers continue to get support. So let's go and actually put some names on here. So here's the first one. So those of you will remember that there was some technology called OpenPilot that ran on CC3D, CC3D Revolutions. I loved OpenPilot. It was a great technology. Now that retired in June last year, and then very quickly afterwards a number of developers picked up the threads of OpenPilot and created a couple of replacements, taking the code as it finished, forking it and using something else. And that's how LibrePilot came about, that we're currently looking at in the CC3D Revolution series. So that's exactly what's happened there. So OpenPilot would have had these little bits at the side, people testing stuff, and now we've got LibrePilot, which is kind of picked up when OpenPilot died. Another one then is to actually put Baseflight and CleanFlight on here. So here's 2 versions of the same thing, where Baseflight was running great and then a fork was taken that then became CleanFlight, and rather than CleanFlight go back into the base code for whatever reason, both of them still exist and are still available for us to use. The last example then is actually to look at things like CleanFlight. CleanFlight is being forked all the time. So just like BaseFlight, where CleanFlight was a fork of it, we have other forks being taken from CleanFlight for developers testing and innovating on their own environments. So we have Boris B doing stuff with Betaflight, which is all around super duper high performing flight code. And we also have some others that are hanging around as well that are concentrating on things like improved GPS code and other bits too. So the reason for going through that is what you tend to find is there can be a little bit of confusion about which software you're getting into. So for example, in this instance, it could be that Betaflight is something that everyone gets involved with and starts putting a lot of effort into, but Betaflight could be a fork of CleanFlight that the intention is to roll all those changes back into CleanFlight, and then those improvements that have been developed in Betaflight are there available in the core base project, and also you get the advantage of all the changes, because in this example the numbers aren't right of course, but you can see that once the fork was taken for Betaflight version 1.6, then version 1.7, 1.8, 1.9, all those changes and improvements that the main team were making don't make it across into Betaflight, because what's happening there is there's iteration and working on the particular code that that developer's interested in, and then that makes it back. But occasionally you do get forks that build a life of their own, and they become really interesting to people. The developers really get behind it and start to jump ship from other projects and get involved in it because it's either something they're interested in, it's a more open community, it's a nicer environment, loads and loads of different reasons why that happened. So when you're looking at using software from open source, which is pretty much the majority of what we're using here in the hobby, just be aware of this and do read the notes, because what you could do is spend a lot of time converting all your craft over, in this case, to something like Betaflight, and then Betaflight goes back to being CleanFlight and you have to change it all back. So by all means, support these developers that are innovating and pushing the boundaries of what is capable in this software, but just keep that in mind, and don't be surprised if occasionally you change a machine over to a new version of code, and then that version of code finishes and goes back to the primary project. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video. There are lots of other videos on the channel and they're carefully ordered into playlists, so you may find that there are other videos on this same subject that you can go and watch. So I would recommend going into the playlist area of Painless360 YouTube channel and looking around and seeing what there is. You never know what you might find. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and happy flying.